For all of our marhumeen, if we can begin with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. As ever, we invite the audience to be able to open their Qur'ans so that they can have the ayat that we're going to be discussing in front of them. So if everyone can get their phones out, open up their apps or their search engines and have the ayat with them, insha'Allah. Amongst the verses that we will look at is chapter number 14, Surah Ibrahim, verse 1. And we will also be looking at Surah Ali Imran, which is chapter number 3, verses 113 to 115. So if everyone can have those verses open, we will ask everyone to refer back to these verses during the discussion, insha'Allah. A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Alhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Alhamdulillahi alladhi hadana li hadha wa ma kunna linahtadiya lawla an hadana Allah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wal mursaleen khatamin nabiyyin sayyidin al-mumajjad bashirin al-musaddaq المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين واللعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه المجيد وفرقانه الحميد وقوله الحق أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وما كان المؤمنون لينفروا كافة فلولا نفر من كل فرقة منهم طائفة ليتفقهوا في الدين ولينذروا قومهم إذا رجعوا إليهم لعلهم يحذرون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected teachers, elders, brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. When our Maraja al-Kiram, may Allah bless them, give us the guidance, especially to our ulama and khutaba, on how to be able to balance between the wujub, the necessity of making knowledge known and clear to an audience, whilst also balancing it with the constraints and the necessary precautions of making sure that it doesn't harm the community or disunite the community. How do our Maraja al-Kiram balance between these two extreme positions? Between giving knowledge, but also ensuring that it is not at a pace that a community cannot handle. So far in our series, we have looked at a number of important points, and just to reiterate a couple of the conclusions that we will be using for our discussion tonight. 2 nights ago, we spoke about the importance of realizing the realities that exist in front of us. That over the last 50 years, there has been a number of paradigm shifts in the Shi'i world that has allowed for the expansion of knowledge to come about and reach us as an ordinary community. Previously, we were apolitical, and then with scholars and the movements that took place in Iraq and in Iran, for example, our community shifted very quickly from an apolitical community to a community that actually demanded politics at the center of its understanding. In fact, now we have a marja who is at the head of a state. And so he began to think about statecraft, state building policies, foreign policy, and international domain. How quickly our understanding shifted as we reviewed our own source literature. For example, our communities as migrant communities shifted away from their mother tongues and began to learn new languages. Previously, our lectures might have been, for example, in Arabic or in Farsi or in Urdu or in Gujarati. Now, for example, you're listening in the language of English. As a migrant community, we were primarily workers, tradesmen, laborers. But as our grandchildren grew up, they became a more educated class, going to universities. All of this shifted the way in which we interacted with knowledge. The problem has been that when our leaders did not prepare us properly for that shifting of knowledge, the accessibility of knowledge, the decentralization and democratization of knowledge, when opinions came in, when new ideas came in, when new Hawzawi interpretations entered into the audience, many a time the audience became put off, became scared, felt like this was something that was problematic for them, and often considered it to be divisive. It was necessary for our leaders to prepare the groundwork for the audience to realize Hawza Ilmiya is not one thing. We have different syllabus. We have a vast array of maraja and mujtahideen, each with varying different forms of interpretation and opinions. When you are informed of that and you receive multiple opinions, you will not consider it as a means of confusion, but rather as a means of growth for yourselves. Now, yesterday we spoke about the importance of the audience having different ways to tackle disparate knowledge coming to them. Tonight we need to move the discussion forward and think about the role of the pulpit and the constraints that are placed upon the khatib and upon the alim or the zakir. When a person sits on the pulpit, he or she is not free to be able to say whatever they want. Actually, we are by our very natures always being considerate and moderating what we have to say. I immediately observe my audience. I immediately take into consideration what I may have spoken there before, who else has spoken there before, what the challenges are. I'm already moderating myself as a natural consequence of my responsibility on the pulpit. I don't have absolute freedom of speech. But we also have two opposing positions. One, where I have to make knowledge clear to you, and I have to be able to deal with certain challenges and questions in the community. But I also have to make sure that when I speak, I don't cause more harm than I do good. The Maraja al-Kiram have provided us with the examples of when you have to push the community out of their comfort zone, and when we actually have to be able to take great care and concern for the sentiments of the community. How do we balance those two things? Particularly tonight, what I wish to be able to present to you is the letter of His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani, may Allah preserve him, in which he wrote a letter, or rather I would say the office of Ayatollah al-Sistani wrote a letter to the Khaja community about some of the questions regarding precarious topics, how to navigate them. And what I want to show you tonight, inshallah, is that His Eminence has actually placed a very interesting restriction within the Khaja community about certain topics to be made. What you'll notice is that those topics are actually clearly spoken about in the Quran, in the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, and yet our maraja have given us precaution to keep away from certain topics. Why is that? And how do we tackle that such that we are able to take the advice of His Eminence, or the office of His Eminence rather, and then thinking about how we still deal with the challenges and the questions that come to us. This will be our topic tonight with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. We're going to start by looking at some survey questions. We placed a survey to the community asking them about their experience with the pulpit and their interactions with the pulpit. And so there are certain questions and answers now that help us to be able to think through this stage of the series. So question number 12 from the survey was the following. How likely are you to hear a range of opinions from the spectrum of Shi'ism from your local pulpit? Yeah? How often will you hear a range of opinions from Shi'ism, not from Islam as a wide range, specifically from the school of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, from your own pulpit? Now, what we mentioned a few minutes ago was that we've had a large democratization of knowledge. Nowadays, everybody seems to have an opinion. And it's also a decentralization of knowledge. It's not the opinion of just one marja. Our community follows several maraji' now. It has several senior ulama that will provide you various different interpretations. As we said yesterday, the cat is out of the bag. You cannot tell a learned, inquisitive community stop thinking, stop asking questions, stop demanding knowledge. There are many places that they want to tell you you can only listen to one opinion and one opinion only. And the moment you have a second opinion, the community is going to become disenfranchised. The community is going to become confused. Now what you'll find is that when you have an educated community thinking, asking, yearning for knowledge, boxing them into one opinion only is immediately contradictory to the waqi', to the reality itself. Do you understand? If you have 50 people who are educated, right, and they're demanding knowledge, and you say to them, this is one opinion, they'll say, great, brilliant, give me evidence for it. Now I've seen evidence for the opinion, I would like to see if there's another opinion, and we can weigh up the various opinions. To say to them, I'll only ever give you one opinion, and you have to stick within that one opinion, is going to be contradictory to the waqi', to the reality. And what you'll find is that there will be a push and a pull between the audience and the speaker, between what they're seeking and what they're getting. What they are seeking is this, what they're getting is this. What will happen? They will go elsewhere to be able to gain their answers. And then often community leaders become very upset with you when you go elsewhere because they're not providing you with the answers. Why? Because it's not in reaction to the waqi'. It's not in relying with the waqi'. Now have a look at this very important question in the survey. The question is, how likely are you to hear a range of opinions across the spectrum of Shi'ism from your local mimbar? As you can see there, 218 people answered this question. And they responded as follows. That 36% of them said, we are likely to hear a range of opinions. So that's approximately 1/3. 1 in 3 will hear a range of opinions from our maraji' al-kiram and our ulama. Unlikely is 35%, and never is almost 8%. So if you add those two, 35 and 8, what's the math? 40? 43. Now think about this. 1/3 of the community only tends to ever hear one opinion from the pulpit. 43% are hearing a range of opinions from the pulpit. Now think about this. If I split my audience into two here and I said, just to you, I'm only ever going to give you one opinion. And to the rest of you here, I'm going to give you a range of opinions. When someone else comes on the pulpit and for the first time you hear a range of opinions, what's going to happen to you? It's going to be difficult for you to accept. What do you mean there's a range of opinions on this mas'ala? What do you mean there's a range of opinions on this aqaidi issue, on this fiqhi issue, on this ethical issue? You'll become scared. You won't know how to handle it. You won't have been primed for dealing with a democratization and decentralization of knowledge. And immediately your response will be, this is causing us confusion. We don't know whether to go here or whether to go there. And similarly, if you are used to hearing a range of opinions from our maraja al-kiram and ulama, and then I only tell you from now on, you can only listen to one opinion, you'll say, what's going on? Why are you narrowing the frame of discussion here? This shows you that internally we have a problem. That some people, they're only ever hearing one opinion. And so, when their children go to university, and in their absaq, they have someone from the Pakistani background, Iranian background, Iraqi background, Lebanese background, Khoja background, Afghani background, and they're all coming with their different maraji, different experiences of life, different interpretations. Their expectation is a diversification of knowledge. That's normal. But if you've only ever experienced one opinion, immediately there's going to be a clash. But as we said, the cat is now out of the bag. You cannot put it back in and say we're only ever going to tell you one opinion, because all of this is in contradiction to the waqi'. Now, when we go to the next one, number 17, question 17. We will see what consequences there are when people who normally only ever hear one opinion and then are given 3 or 4, what happens to them? And similarly, those who are used to hearing 3 and 4, when they are only told about one, what happens to them? Question 17 on the survey, inshallah. The question is, what do you do when you hear an opinion which you don't understand or you agree with? Look at this. Almost 5% of the audience said, I just accept it because it's coming from the pulpit. 26% said, I tend to clarify it with another speaker. 33% say that they do independent research and say, I go and actually check for a reference myself. And 42% said, I go to another scholar to be able to check what is happening. Question 15, if we can go. Question 15 is the following. How often do you have an opportunity to ask questions or interact with or clarify from the pulpit? So now, as we said, there's a democratization of knowledge. 30% of people, or 36% of people only ever hear one opinion. But on occasion, they're informed to multiple opinions. How do they go about clarifying the issue? What you'll find here is that in regards to how often you get the opportunity, 33% said sometimes they get to clarify their questions. 34% said rarely do I ever get to clarify my questions. And 20% of the audience said we never get the opportunity to clarify our questions from the pulpit or with the speaker. Think about that. 1 in 5 never get to interact with the speaker and clarify what they hear is coming from the pulpit. Can you think of anything more backwards than this? Can you think of anything more outdated than this? You know, in the ahadith, at the time of the Holy Prophet of Islam, Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alih, inside the masjid of the Prophet in Medina al-Munawwara, the Prophet used to be sitting with men. Women would come into the majlis directly and speak to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wa alih. Directly. This is mentioned in ahadith that are used for fiqh, meaning it has the highest level of grade to accept it. Yeah. Now I won't show you, but there's comments. Yeah, there's questions. How often do you get to interact with the speaker? Ask questions for clarification. 20% said never. There's comments in there. I'll read you some of the comments. Women don't see the man speaking generally on the pulpit. If it's a woman talking, I imagine there's some chance of interaction. Another person, lol, I'm a woman. How do I ever get to interact with the pulpit? Another answer, especially as a woman, I never get to interact with the pulpit. Another answer, only on Thursdays do we get to interact with the scholar with the topic that he chooses and not the topic that the community chooses. Look at the difference between Islam proper and the way in which we've reduced the pulpit to these sorts of cultural practices and avoided the realities that are in front of us. No wonder people don't come to the mosque. No wonder people feel like Islam is failing them. If this is the way the pulpit is going to be, where a woman will answer by saying, I never get to interact with a scholar. Lol, I'm a woman. How can I have any opportunities in the community? When you have this levels of backwardsness in the community, of course people are going to flee the pulpit. And then we wonder where people are. Now here, what we have to realize is that Islam had certain goals. If you all open your Quran, we'll go to the first ayah that we want to show you. If everyone opens their Quran, it was chapter number 14, Surah Ibrahim, verse 1. That Islam had certain goals for you and I to achieve. The Quran has many ayat saying what Islam hopes to achieve. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the following, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alif Lam Ra. Kitabun anzalnahu ilayka litukhrijan nasa min adh-dhulumati ilan nur. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that this is a book, the Quran, which we have revealed to you in order that by the permission of Allah it would bring people out of darkness and into light. If the pulpit is giving you one opinion only, and if it is not interacting with you or forbidding the interaction with you, and it is pushing people away from the pulpit itself, how is the Quran, how is the religion of Islam ever going to take people out of darkness and into light? In chapter number 7, verse number 172, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that amongst the goals of Islam is وَيَضَعُ عَنْهُمْ إِسْرَهُمْ وَأَغْلَالَ الَّتِي كَانَتْ عَلَيْهِمْ, to lift the burdens off the shoulders of society and to break the shackles that are on society, on people's thinking. If the pulpit is not taking people out of darkness and into light, and it is not breaking the shackles that are on people, it is a failing pulpit. Because those are the goals of Islam according to the Quran. Now this doesn't necessarily mean that the pulpit gets to say whatever it wants. Actually, there are constraints on the pulpit and it has to navigate the realities on the ground. The various different inclinations and sensitivities of different communities. For without that, you will find that people are put off in a different way. Some people are put off because they don't have access to the pulpit. But if the pulpit was a free-for-all and anyone could say whatever they wanted, then again, people would be put off from the pulpit and misguided. So you cannot have those two extremes. There needs to be a balance between those two extremes. Now, if you look at the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provides us with the most interesting example about the issue of when you can shake a community. And that's what gives rise to the issue of the balance between making clear knowledge, but also not dividing a community, right? You all know that story of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. There is some sort of, event that takes place. The majority of the community goes out. Ibrahim alayhi salam destroys all of the idols except the biggest one. Right? So now, having destroyed this set of idols, the people of the community come back. and they see all of their idols destroyed lying on the ground, except the largest one. They know that Ibrahim alayhi salam, this youth, has had a problem with the idols all along, so they go and ask him, did you see what happened? They begin to accuse him of doing something. What's the response from Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam? Ask the biggest idol if he can speak. Now what's interesting is the reaction that his audience go through. For the first time, they actually start to think for themselves. Because they realize that it's just an idol, it's stone, it's brick, it can't answer. The penny drops, as we would say in English. You know what the ayah says? فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. For the first time, they began to introspect into themselves, to really reflect on the things that they have believed all this time. Shocked them. So you can see here within the Quran, there is space to be able to shock an audience, to be able to show that something is not right, that the practices of the community are not in line with Islamic practices, for example. فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. Now you'll find this, that at times our Maraji al-Kiram do this, at times our ulama do this, but they don't do this very often. They do this only on certain occasions to bring the community back in when it needs to be brought back in. I'll give you a couple of examples for you to think about, and then inshallah we want to be able to read this note from His Eminence Ayatollah Sistani and think through what he has said about the balance between these two positions. فَرَجَعُوا إِلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ. So there is space to be able to shock people in order to get them to think after they have declined to think for a long time. In our own community, and I'm addressing the Khoja community, and when I say our community here, you know that Marhum Mullah Asghar, rahmatullahi ta'ala alayhi, was the lead figure of the community. Many of you might know in the Indo-Pak community there is a practice on the night of the istishhad of Shah Qasim, Hazrat Qasim ibn al-Hasan, salamullahi alayhima, that they believe erroneously that Qasim alayhi salam got married on the night of Ashura, and as a result of this, on the night of Hazrat Qasim's martyrdom, when we commemorate it, people do commemorations of this idea, and they do a lot of things to try to, indicate this marriage and encourage these things and so on and so forth. There's lots of cultural things. Now there's no record of this taking place, no record of Qasim ibn al-Hasan alayhi salam getting married on that night, no record of any practices that should be taken off the back of this. But our communities had gone so far down the rabbit hole into these practices that often if someone said, where's an evidence for this? Why are you doing these things? It caused fights within the community. And it happens until today, sadly. Marhum Mullah Azhar had to come on the pulpit and state, there is no evidence for this event in history. You cannot then create cultures off the back of something that you fabricated yourselves, and then consider it to be so holy and sanctified that if you're trying to stop it from happening, people go into a fist fight with each other. Now, I don't know if you know, this is before my time, but I'm told that shocked the community. Really, people were, what do you mean this has nothing to do with Islam? We've been doing this for 100 years. I don't care if you've been doing it for 100 years. There's no evidence to this. You cannot build a culture based on this. Now, if Marhum Mullah Asghar had come here to an Arab Irani community, for example, and said the same thing, this event is non-existent, you can't build a culture, everyone would be like, well, of course. We don't do anything like that. There's no such thing in the Arab community, Irani community, as an example of this. It's not the same thing. We don't practice it. It wouldn't have affected the community in the same way. But he understood that the practice had actually outstripped the importance of Qasim alayhi salam, that it actually spawned into such a debilitating culture in and of itself that the leader of the community had to be able to stamp it out, even if people got upset with him. It doesn't matter at this point. I have to speak out. I have a wujub of idhar al-ilm. There is an obligation on me to make clear knowledge, and there is also a harma of kitman al-ilm, a prohibition on me to hide true knowledge. So he had to be able to go to that extreme. At times, our maraja al-kiram will even have to go to this extent when they know the extent of the backlash upon them is going to be so detrimental. Now, when I give you this example, I'm not saying I agree with His Eminence or disagree. I'm just giving you the example, right? The mas'ala isn't important. I'm talking to you about the consequences of idhar al-ilm and the wujub of making clear knowledge. And even if it means sometimes a community finds it hard to digest. His Eminence, Al-Imam Al-Mujahid, Sayyid Ali Khamenei, may Allah preserve him, you know that he, in his opinion, states that certain mourning practices are prohibited. For example, the practices of bloodletting. And he gives his justifications for that. I have had the honor of going to India twice to recite for Muharram, yes? I've seen it with my own eyes and my own ears. When that fatwa came, there were certain people, they weren't doing zanjir before. Just to spite Sayyid Khamenei, they started to do zanjir. When they were doing their zanjir, they actually were doing la'an, na'udhu billah, on His Eminence, Sayyid Khamenei. Can you see? The reaction was so bad that it actually caused people to, I'm not talking about the action itself, but they're now doing the action for the wrong reasons. They're not doing it out of love of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. They're doing it to spite a marja. What are you doing? Can you see? But despite knowing the mentality of certain people, at times a marja, an alim, has to put forward an opinion in order to be able to deal with the situation at hand. This is idhar al-ilm and the hurma of kitman al-ilm. On the other side, there is another role, a balancing role that has to be played, and the marja and the ulama express to us. One side is idhar al-ilm. We have to make knowledge known. On the counterbalance side, there is what is known as Dafad Dharar al-muhtamal. We have to be able to stop harm from coming to the community, or at least the harm that we can potentially see, that we can see are negative consequences. Sometimes a speaker comes and says something from the pulpit. At the end of it, everybody is left confused. At the end of it, everybody's left fighting with each other. This is not allowed. There is daf'at dharar. You have to protect the community from harm. And sometimes the harm is confusion, and sometimes the harm is disunity, and so on and so forth. So our maraji' tell us that we are constantly between these two things, idhar al-ilm and daf'at dharar, stopping harm from coming to the community. I want to be able to read to you a very important and interesting letter from the office of His Eminence Grand Ayatollah Sayyid Ali Hussein al-Sistani, may Allah preserve him, to the Khoja community. And this is actually published on the 12th of February 2019. So it's a very recent set of guidances from Marja al-A'la to the community. And in here, what is raised is that there are several confusing topics for the community. That when they're spoken about from the pulpit, the community is actually having a fight within each other. And so people are now going to the marja and saying, these are confusing topics. These are topics that maybe even the marja himself has a set opinion on. And people are saying other opinions than what Ayatollah As-Sistani, his position is. And so because our community is used to hearing one opinion, when you get a second opinion from another marja, or a third opinion, or another alim, sometimes it can be confusing for the community. So the community leaders went to the office of Ayatollah As-Sistani and said, there are several problems being raised in the community. What is your response? So I'm going to read to you parts of the letter that are important for the discussion, and I want you to think about this question. Why would a marja of such esteemed wisdom place either a prohibition or a constraint on a community to discuss knowledge that is already spoken about in the Quran and Ahadith? So the letter is from the 12th of February 2019. I'll only read parts of it because you could find the letter yourselves. Very well known. To the office of His Eminence, the Supreme Marja, the Grand Ayatollah, Sayyid Ali As-Sistani, may Allah prolong his life. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We would like to submit to Your Eminence that in recent years there have appeared some people who claim to be learned, who spread amongst our youths issues, especially about the fundamental aspects of the faith, the usul ad-din, and the practical branches of the faith, the furu' ad-din. Amongst the 10 points that were presented to him, the claim that salvation in the hereafter does not exclusively depend on embracing and believing in the religion of Islam. So often we're asked this question, my children, will our Sunni brethren go to heaven? Will a non-Muslim go to heaven? Will Diana, Princess of Wales, go to heaven? Will Gandhi go to... It's a normal question. Our children ask it all the time. That perfection of religion was not possible to have been accomplished during the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That the Prophet did not specify the age of bulugh, and that there is no objection to civil marriages and civil divorces. So 10 questions were raised to His Eminence, Ayatollah As-Sistani. May Allah bless him. I'm going to read part of the answer. And again, keep in mind my question to you. Why would a marja, may Allah bless him, tell us, don't talk about certain topics? Don't bring it from the pulpit. His Eminence responds with the following. Or rather, I should stress, the office of Ayatollah As-Sistani responds with the following. Quote, many of the above mentioned statements, these issues that are coming in the community, contradict the explicit text of the Holy Quran and the Blessed Sunnah. Some of these issues contradict with the most clear and authenticated principles used in deriving the religious laws. The duty of the Islamic preacher is to invite people towards the usul ad-din and to spread its well-established teachings as represented in the clear verses of the Quran and in the beautiful sayings of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Now this part is the most important part. It is inappropriate, Dafad Dharar. You can't say everything. You have to be able to understand your audience. It is inappropriate for the religious preacher to use the mimbar to spread his personal opinions which create divisions and differences amongst the religious people. Very important. I just want everybody to note it, to make sure that they're conscious of what's been said by His Eminence. It is inappropriate for the religious preacher to use the pulpit to spread his personal opinions which creates divisions and differences amongst the religious people, amongst the mu'mineen. Now, we mentioned earlier on, just now in this letter, that one of the problems that was raised in this letter was, as an example, the query of who gets salvation in the akhirah. Yeah? So the argument being made is that the question of who gets salvation is such a confusing, conflicting topic for our community that people are becoming confused by it, such that we now have to go to the marja to ask him, should we be talking about these problems, about these questions? His Eminence, the marja, or the office of the marja rather, has responded by saying, you should not talk about things that are going to be confusing, disuniting for the community. Now open up your Qur'ans for a second, please. And then we will try to conclude with the Masa'ib. So I mentioned to you, please open Surah Al Imran verses 113 to 115. Yeah? My question to you is this. The Marja's wisdom is beyond ours. And he's given us some guidelines here, hasn't he? He said, look, the community is finding it difficult to have this conversation. Don't have this conversation from the pulpit. Now the issue of this mas'ala of who goes to heaven and doesn't go to heaven, Sunni, Shia, Christian, Jew, atheist, is something that is explicitly mentioned in the Quran, explicitly mentioned in the ahadith. Yet the marja is saying, be careful of speaking about these things. Why? Have a look at these verses, yeah? Everybody's there? You can see the ayat? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Laysu sawa'an. They are not all the same. Ahlul Kitab. Don't think all of them are bad people. Laysu sawa'an. Min Ahlil Kitabi. From amongst Ahlul Kitab is ummatun qa'imatun. Yatluna ayatil layli ana al-layli wa hum yasjudun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. They're not all alike. The people of Ahlul Kitab, amongst them there are those who are upright people. They spend their nights reading the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They spend their nights in sujood. Be honest with yourself. Most Muslims don't do that. Most Shia don't do that. Spend their night in qiyam and sujood. Fair? Allah is saying in Medina, in Surah Al Imran, revealed in the 3rd year after Hijrah, Christians and Jews are doing this. Next verse, 114. Who are these people? This group from amongst Ahlul Kitab. Yu'minuna billah. They are mu'mineen. They believe in Allah. Wal yawmil akhir. And they believe in the day of judgment. وَيَأْمَرُونَ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمُنْكَرِ. They actually command you towards good and forbid the evil. وَيُسَارِعُونَ فِي الْخَيْرَاتِ. And they vie with each other in doing good deeds, khairat. وَأُولَٰئِكَ مِنَ الصَّالِحِينَ. And they are the salihin, the righteous folk. Next verse, 115. وَمَا يَفْعَلُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ. And whatever this group do of good, فَلَنْ يُكْفَرُوا. They shall never be denied their reward. وَاللَّهُ عَلِيمٌ بِالْمُتَّقِينَ. Now think about this. It's very interesting. You have an ayah or 3 ayat that's so clear on this issue, isn't it? Ahlul Kitab, they do good deeds, they believe, and they have their reward. Allah says, فَلَنْ. You know Arabic better than me. What's the difference between lan and lam? Lan is never. They shall never be denied their reward. Yet His Eminence is saying, don't talk about these things. The Quran talks about it. But His Eminence is saying, don't talk about it. There's a hadith which comes to us from Tafsir al-Qummi, from our 5th Imam Muhammad al-Baqir salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. عن أبي جعفر عليه السلام قال قلت له جعلت فداك. May my life be sacrificed for you, يا ابن رسول الله. ما حال الموحدين المقرين بنبوة محمد صلى الله عليه وآله من المسلمين المذنبين. O 5th Imam, what is going to be the state of those people who believe in one Allah and the Messenger from amongst the Muslims, and they are sinners, مذنبين. الذين يموتون وليس لهم إمام ولا يعرفون ولايتكم. And they're going to die without having known their Imam Ma'soom and not having done the wilaya of an Imam Ma'soom. This is the hadith. Very clear. Imam alayhi salam responds by saying, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He will place them in a place on the day in Akhirah. فَمَنْ كَانَ لَهُ عَمِلَ صَالِحٍ. Whoever amongst those Sunnis who have done good, وَلَمْ يَظْهَرْ مِنْهُ عَدَاوَةٌ, and have not expressed hatred to us Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam, فَإِنَّهُ يَدْخُلُ لَهُ خَدًّا إِلَى الْجَنَّةِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enter him into Jannah. Ayah talking about Ahlul Kitab. Hadith, clear hadith talking about Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Our marja says, don't speak about it. It can become confusing. Think about it. Why is he saying this? You have clear ayat that are discussing this issue, clear hadith discussing this issue, and the marja says don't talk about it. Dafad Dharar. Why? Because there are some people in the community that they're still so immature that when you want to be able to talk to them about certain basic masail, things that are mentioned in the Quran and ahadith, they are so immature that they can't handle the conversation. The marja says, because your community is still at that level, don't speak about these things. Clear ayah, not something so confusing. Clear hadith, not confusing. The marja says, be careful, don't speak about these things. Because there's some amongst you that they won't be able to handle conversations. Can you see the balance? How even the marja says you can't even talk about verses of Quran nowadays. I'm prohibiting you from talking about ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim wasalam. Sayyidina al-Aziz, marja al-a'la, why are you prohibiting me from discussing verses of the Quran? Because there's people in your community, they can't handle basic conversations. Now I'm going to ask you to think about this one last thing, and then we'll conclude. I want you to answer me this question. These verses were revealed in which surah? Surah Ali Imran. Which year did I tell you Surah Ali Imran was revealed in? Third year, after Hijrah. In Medina, there are Jews, Christians, Sabians, Zoroastrians, Mu'mineen, Munafiqeen, Muslimin. It's a whole pluralistic society, correct? How many years were there in Mecca? Mecca. 13. 3 years after Hijrah, this verse is revealed. So how many years total? 16. Everybody's there. This verse telling us that there are good people amongst Ahlul Kitab and that they can potentially be rewarded for their good deeds is being revealed 16 years into the movement of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam after Jahiliyyah. Understand? 16 years into the movement. Today, our community is so backwards that when we want to have normal conversations about what the Quran says and ahadith says, it's so immature. 1400 years later, the marja has to place restrictions on us. Whereas those juhala people, after just 13, 16 years with the Prophet, they were capable of handling these conversations. I'm asking a simple question. How far back have we gone, Shia's gone, that we cannot even tolerate conversations that even juhala were tolerating having? You understand? Nowhere when the ayah came down in Medina did the Muslims go, you can't say this. How can you say, Ya Rasulullah, Christians, there are good people amongst them? At the time of the fifth Imam, when he gives this hadith, no Shia said, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, how can you say Sunnis are going to heaven? No one said this. There's no record of this. Today, amongst Shia, if you actually have this conversation with them from the Quran, from the ahadith, they will start speaking against you. We've gone further backwards than when the juhala were able to have conversations, tolerate conversations. That's how far backwards we've gone. This is why our maraji have to put such restrictions on our communities. Do you understand? The solution is for you and I to raise ourselves. If our marja, may Allah bless him, is saying these things can be divisive, what you're being told is there are ayat of the Quran you can't even talk about. But the Quran says this is hudan linnas. But now for us, we're beginning to have restrictions on it. It's hudan linnas, but for mu'mineen, it's restrictions on it. Can you see? Why? Daf'ad Dharar. The marja and the ulama have to be able to make sure that when we speak about topics from the pulpit, it doesn't cause more harm. But why should speaking about ayat of Quran cause harm? Can you see that? Either because the speaker himself doesn't know how to be able to present it, the audience is so used to only hearing one opinion that it doesn't know how to navigate multiple opinions, or that the community is too emotional about ilm that it doesn't know how to balance the discussions itself. The speakers must learn how to deal with this. The fact that we have such great guidance from our maraja, it is testifying to our circumstances that we find ourselves in, that our communities cannot handle certain conversations. It can't go on that we can't speak about certain ayat of the Quran, ahadith of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. We need to be able to raise our levels, and then inshallah we can revisit the constraints of Daf'ad Dharar al-muhtamala, to be able to understand where the boundaries are between making sure we do Idhar al-ilm and Daf'ad Dharar. It is upon the speakers on this pulpit to understand Daf'ad Dharar and to be able to balance themselves when they speak to the audience, such that it doesn't go against the guidelines of our maraji' and it doesn't cause more harm than good. Our speakers have a huge responsibility on themselves, just like the audience has a huge responsibility on themselves, and this is the relationship between the two. And inshallah tomorrow night we will continue this. In days like today and nights like tonight, there is this daughter of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam who cannot sleep. The reason why she cannot sleep properly is because she has been lashed and hit so many times that her body is so bruised that the way in which she tries to lie on the ground of the dungeons of Yazid causes her suffering and pain. The reason as to why she cannot sleep is because the floor of the dungeon is so cold that she is constantly shivering in the nights. The reason why she cannot sleep is because outside of the dungeon there is constant chatter and noise and celebration at what they perceive to be the victory of Yazid over Ahlul Bayt alayhim wassalam. The reason as to why she cannot sleep is because she is so used to sleeping on the chest of her father, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein, and now she places her head on the cold floor of the dungeons in the prison cells of Yazid. For those few moments that eventually that Ruqayya is able to fall asleep, able to drift off, she will see her father in her dreams. She will see her grandmother in her dreams. One of the narrations says that she sees in her dream her grandmother Fatima al-Zahra. Fatima is on a pulpit of light, and she is also there with the various women folk of the heavens. With her is Khadija alayha salam, Maryam alayha salam, and Ruqayya sees in her dream that Fatima is holding a shirt which has been torn to pieces. Fatima steps forward and says, "Oh my dear child, this is the shirt of your father Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. This is the shirt that has so many tears in it from the amount of arrows that were thrown at him, the amount of times he was stabbed with swords. Oh my dear granddaughter Ruqayya, this will be the shirt that I present to Allah on the day of judgment, and I seek revenge for what happened to my beloved Hussein." على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the appearance of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be alongside him at all times in our life and in our death. If we are to pass away from this world before his coming, Ya Allah, raise us from our graves so that we can partake in the victories of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times, those people in a state of war and oppression, poverty, homelessness, disease and disaster. Ya Allah, grant them all safety, security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, help our ulama and khataba and dhakireen balance between the wujub of Idhar al-ilm and Dafad Dharar, such that we bring people together and we don't disunite our community. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to preserve our maraji' al-kiram as guiding lights for us. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the final moments of our life, we die in the love of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Wassalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In honor of the captors of Karbala, let us conclude with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.